So, all right. So this meeting is being recorded. Whoops, I'm skipping over a few things. All right, so for a technology overview, I know many of you are familiar with Zoom at this point after using it for several years. Again, there's a Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen, so you can use that to type in questions. You're also welcome to click the raise hand button at the bottom if you'd like to ask a question, and I'll keep a lookout for your hand and call on you. If you are on the phone, you can use *9, and that will virtually raise your hand, and I'll call on you as well. Whoa, sorry, new computer, things are moving fast here. We do have a poll, just one poll during this, and it's actually just a demographic poll. The demographic poll is an optional survey. We have started this really over the past year or so, just so we can get a sense of who is coming to our meetings, so we can get a sense of who's not coming to our meetings. We want to do a better job of reaching out. And so we're trying to get a baseline of who we're reaching, and so we can figure out mechanisms to get to the people who we're not reaching. So I'm going to launch that poll right now and give people a few seconds to take this poll. And with that, actually, I'm going to get out of my presentation here, and I'm going to turn it over to our esteemed engineers to get their presentation up and running. And so Teresa or Cyrus, if you want to put your presentation on up there. Well, people are taking the demographic survey.
If you help me find a way to share my screen.
At the very bottom, there's the share screen button. Do you see that?
No.
There's a ribbon at the bottom of, let me make sure that you have full capability. You should, as a co-host, be able to share screen.
Mute, stop video, participants, Q&A, polls, share screen. Advanced sharing options. That's not what I want to do. Just share.
Share, and then you click on the presentation.
I apologize.
That's all right.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for bearing with me.
I do see it up there now. It looks like it.
The Zoom meeting norms.
Yeah.
Do you see the layout or the presentation?
I see the layout.
Okay, so how do we?
You can go from current slide and click forward, or from beginning, either way. Yep, over to the left. There you go.
All right, but I can't get it into presentation mode. If I go back, sharing screen, and over here. There.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah,
so,
yeah. Oh, I can go over this portion. That
okay,
is one slide that I did want to, that I typically go over, and that's Zoom meeting norms. Basically, the meeting norms are, let's just all be nice to each other. Let's treat each other like people. And with that, we ask that you commit to learning and avoid speculation. We also ask that if you're speaking over the phone, move to a quiet area, because we do actually want to hear you. I know it can be hard because we just have life going on around us. But if you can, just try to move to a quiet area. And then again, remember the importance and rights and the dignity of other people. So critique ideas, not people, and be very thoughtful about your language. We do want this to be a welcoming place for people, and language is important. So with that, I'm going to end the poll. Thank you for those who took it. We really appreciate it. This does help us out a lot. All right, I'm going to end the poll and let you carry on with the meeting.
Thank you, Heather. Good evening, everyone. My name's Teresa Bridges. I am the project manager for the Brooks Street Improvements Project. We also have with us tonight Cyrus Nahidi, and he is a transportation engineer who's filling in for Cynthia Redinger in her absence right now. But the project location, as you may be aware, is Brooks from Miller to Sunset. And then there is also a portion along Mixed Wood where we are doing some water main, and then possibly some sidewalk infill on bidding. So the project scope will include utilities, so the water main replacement, and that's on Brooks from Sunset down to Mixed Wood, and then up Mixed Wood over to Red Oak. The stormwater management needs to be determined where that would be placed. And then road resurfacing is occurring across the entire Brooks Street. New sidewalk, as indicated in the previous slide in purple here, or magenta. We have these locations where there is currently no sidewalk. So that is being proposed to be filled with new sidewalk. And then lastly, an intersection reconfiguration of the Brooks Sunset Vesper intersection. So, drinking water infrastructure. Why are we replacing water mains? We need to update the aging infrastructure to current standards. It will reduce maintenance cost. It increases capacity of existing undersized pipe, which helps our overall network, and it will improve fire hydrant coverage as needed. Stormwater management improvement benefits include alleviating flooding in the Allen Creek watershed experienced during heavy rainfalls. We have potential to infiltrate the stormwater, and that will recharge our groundwater, which is good for providing our drinking water, and possibly a rain garden for increased stormwater quality. Now, does anyone have any questions about the utilities?
And I'll keep an eye out for hands raised and for questions submitted. We've got one hand raised. Ricardo, please go ahead.
Yes, so are you thinking of putting a rain garden somewhere along Brooks?
You know, something that we have recently explored was the notion that if we reduce the pavement in this intersection, it's possible we could capture an opportunity to put in a rain garden.
Oh, so over there, okay. So less pavement, okay, that sounds good.
And we have a written question, and that is, where would the storm water retention go?
So the stormwater retention is going to be under the pavement. It will likely be towards the bottom of the hill, as you may be aware. Most of this slopes down towards Miller. Up here is the highest point of the city of Ann Arbor. So it makes sense to capture it down, downstream. However, we will be doing soil boring analyses to figure out if any of these soils are percolating soils. And if there's an opportunity to find good draining soils, that's where we would build stormwater management, because that's where we could get the stormwater to actually infiltrate. But a lot of the soils in Ann Arbor tend to be clayey, and so we don't usually find great spots for infiltration, but we're hoping we may find some. We're going to take about 17 bore locations to see if we can find some good soil.
Great. And our next question is, how long is this project anticipated to take, and when is it scheduled?
So we would be going out to bid in about January, February timeframe. We're looking to get started as soon as the frost laws lift in April, May timeframe, and it will take the majority of the construction season. We've got a lot of work to get done as part of this project. So it will go probably through the end of summer, if not into the fall a bit.
Okay, and then we just have a question about capacity, and I assume that means water capacity. But Tom, if you wanted to expand on that, feel free. If you meant it another way.
Was it water main capacity, or would it be the capacity of the stormwater management?
Capacity of the planned retention on the south of Brooks.
Okay, so so we were given a budget through the capital improvement plan to make stormwater improvements, and I believe the budget is about $600,000. So we're going to put as much stormwater management as we can with that funding allocated to that. So it may be, like I've said, we're going to look for infiltrating soils, but the other option will be to put in large pipes, and it'll be large 36-inch pipes, you know, as much as we can bury.
All right. And then we are wanting to get our Orangeburg replaced. When do we need to get it done by so it won't interfere with the project? Good question.
Yeah, so we would be doing resurfacing at the very end of the project, which is going to be near the end of the summer or into the fall. However, you know, it would take coordination with your contractor to work around our contractor. It would be best to do it earlier than that, but you would have, you know, all the way up until the end of the summer before we're resurfacing. And just to let you know, when we have a better idea of the construction schedule, a more accurate timeline, I'll be sending out notifications to everyone, and we will be updating the web page as well.
And then we have a question about sidewalks, how existing trees, mailboxes, and utility poles will be removed. Do you want to wait till, because we have a section about the sidewalks at the end.
Yep.
So maybe we go over that first, and then we'll come back to this question.
Right.
Okay. For stormwater management, if there's infiltrating soil, would there be any impact on basements in the area due to the additional groundwater?
That's a good question. You know, that is definitely something we would be sure to ask as far as the soils engineers that we hire as consultants. It's understood that, you know, the way our city has been developed is that a lot less water infiltrates in the soil these days. Basements have been built with certain waterproofing, sump pumps, etc. And, you know, the groundwater level in has been decreasing over time. So it's usually more of a positive thing that that we're reintroducing the groundwater infiltrating, and then the way the soils work and the layers that they, you know, are compiled in, they can have their own blocking areas where, you know, you've got some infiltrating soils here, but you've got clay there, and that can protect, you know, the adjacent area. So, but it's definitely a concept, you know, worth asking somebody who really has the expertise for it.
All right, and this was an Orangeburg question again. Is there a way to encourage and coordinate Orangeburg work on the whole street to avoid cutting into the new service?
That is a possibility. I know, I guess in my previous experience working for another municipality, I have encountered where we did projects like this, and we approached all the property owners, with the options of, of looking at doing their utilities. I'm not sure if the city does that as a regular practice, but I can look into it.
Okay. And then here's a question about a driveway cut. We would prefer to have our driveway curb cut in a different location than the current. Is that a possibility with this project?
That is a possibility, but I definitely would need to speak, personally to you, so you can reach out to me and I can look into it. It has to follow the standards, and I want to look at all the circumstances surrounding it, but I would explore the possibility, yes.
Okay, and then this next question is about traffic calming devices. Will we be covering speed bumps and versus speed tables on bricks later on in the presentation?
We will be covering the road resurfacing section later in the presentation.
I think that's coming up next, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And so there's another question about speed bumps. So we'll get back to that in a moment when we cover the road resurfacing. And then here's a comment. In the past, the city included a unit price for homeowners to reconnect. They replaced Orangeburg with this sewer. Oh, so I think we'll need to look into that. And then the next question is, can you estimate how long residents may be prevented from driving to their homes?
Local access is by and large maintained. There are a few exceptions in which perhaps they're pouring concrete in front of your, at your driveway approach, or across your driveway for a sidewalk, or perhaps they are trenching a water main across your driveway frontage. So there are some times when you won't have access directly, but for the most part, contractors are told to maintain local access, emergency vehicle access, delivery and mail services, garbage services. And yet, towards the end of the project, there may be a couple days where we do the pavement work that would be a consistent, oh, you do need to stay off the road. You do need to park on other streets, perhaps.
Okay, and I think that is the questions for now. So let's maybe move on to road resurfacing, and as other questions come up, we'll get to those.
All right, here we go, road resurfacing. So PASER is a rating system, pavement surface evaluation and rating. Pavement conditions are evaluated every other year on a 1 to 10 scale. And Brooks Street has pavement condition ratings ranging from 1 to 3, and 1 is failing, and obviously 2 and 3 are very poor. So oftentimes the city will strategically do road resurfacing when we do water main and storm sewer, because we're already disrupting so much of the pavement. Our intent, I'll mention this now, I don't have a slide for it, but the traffic calming, the speed bumps that are currently there, we were planning on maintaining them. So we're just replacing them in kind. So with that, does anyone have questions about the road resurfacing or the traffic calming? Oh, you're muted, Heather.
Sorry.
That's
Yeah, there are questions. The first one is, will the speed bumps on bricks be rebuilt in the same spots, which is what you just stated, or be reconfigured? But the thought associated with that is that this person is not convinced that they optimally slow people down who are racing up and down brooks. All right.
Well, I'm not sure if, Cyrus, you have any thoughts about that, or if by rebuilding them, that might put them in a better condition that would help. Cyrus, do you have anything to offer on that?
Sorry, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I think I think there's an opportunity to discuss whether they need to be reconfigured, but I believe as a default, without hearing feedback from the community, without any other data to indicate that we would do something else, our default position would be to put them in the same spots. But I think that's open for it, as much as the traffic calming devices are open for other changes. You'd probably have to speak to that Teresa from the budget and project management standpoint, but I believe that that's a possibility. But
yeah, and I mean it's a good question, and I'll note it to also take back to the other project transportation engineer when she gets back to discuss, you know, how the locations, how the placement was decided on at that time. You know, certainly when we do resurfacing projects, we take that opportunity to update pavement markings and potentially reconfigure pavement markings, as I'm sure you're all aware. And so, you know, with this pavement resurfacing, it does seem like there's an opportunity to reassess if we deem that there are better locations based on, you know, any feedback or surveying. You know, we might be able to run a I don't know if speed tests can get run or anything of that nature. I'm not sure what the traffic calming process is. I know it is a long process. I know that Brooks Street had already gone through it. And so, you know, I just need to explore that a little bit more.
And we've got a hand raised by David Wiseman. So go ahead, David.
I'm concerned about the statement that the mixed wood resurfacing is not necessarily going to happen. And living on mixed wood, I certainly think it is necessary. Could you comment more on that? What is the current rating for mixed wood street?
So I do have here mixed wood is a number 2. So while it wasn't indicated in the capital improvement plan, since we're doing the water main, it does make sense to see if we can incorporate that.
How would you do it otherwise?
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then Brian has a hand raised. So go ahead, Brian.
Yes, good evening. A question regarding, you know, speed bumps versus speed tables. I don't know if it's possible we could look at speed tables that have the same effect of reducing much more mobile cars?
I think you cut out there, at least for me, you cut out. If you don't mind repeating yourself, Brian.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm hoping that we can look at using speed tables instead of speed bumps on brooks that have the same impact of slowing vehicles, but are, I guess, less damaging and more friendly towards, low profile cars with low approach angle.
Whiner, is that what he's saying?
Bobby said that.
Somebody's background. I'm not sure who we're hearing. Anyway, the question was about whether we could use speed bumps rather than speed bumps, if that would be a possibility for us to explore.
That's correct. Speed bumps are not very good for, some vehicles, even at low speeds.
I can hear somebody laughing. I don't know who that is that we're hearing. But Teresa or Cyrus, do you have any thoughts on the potential for doing a speed hump treatment rather than a speed bump?
Sorry, my unmute button seems stuck. I think in general, any changes you make to traffic calming, as Teresa and and I both kind of referred to, I believe there's an opportunity to do that when a capital project comes through through an area that has traffic calming, but we'd have to just make sure that it's done sort of in conjunction and not overriding, what was maybe agreed to with traffic calming previously. But there's opportunity to at least revisit the discussion. And yeah, to that point, I guess I'll offer that speed tables are typically that's typically what gets installed as part of new traffic calming projects. Other vertical devices like speed humps, I think they're technically called in our guidebook. So those more like parabolic curve shapes are not installed as regularly. So.
And we have a similar question. So along the same lines, could traffic calming happen without speed bumps? I'd rather see more controlled intersections, four-way stops, et cetera, to calm traffic. So it sounds like we're gonna look into the potential, go back and look at what was done, why the speed bumps were decided on in the first place and the locations of those, and revisit the logic behind that, and then see what kind of opportunity there is to revisit that.
Yes, but I'll also add that we will be looking at bump out locations potentially. So, so there is the question of how the trade-off for the traffic calming, the bump outs, do take away from on-street parking. And I'm not sure, I would look for some feedback on how much on-street parking gets utilized. When you have cars parked on street, that helps for traffic calming because you're essentially you're reducing the amount of width that a driver has. So they're going to feel it's a more narrow street and they have to be more careful. So either you've got cars parked or you create, that narrowing with the bump outs of curb. So that's a possibility as well. And I'm going to point that out as part of as part of the options for the new sidewalk, to possibly put in some bump outs to help go around the trees. So that's an additional traffic calming, it's got, a couple of different benefits, those bump outs do.
Yeah. yeah, Teresa's right that in general, a bump out location or on a street where there is consistent street, parking on street, those both narrow the width of the road. So I would definitely point out that any additions of bump outs would sort of help with traffic calming without being part of the traffic calming program, so to speak, if it's part of this capital project. The other thing about that question that I just want to highlight is that our traffic calming is a little bit different than a stop sign is more like a traffic signal, in that it tells the users approaching the intersection who has the right of way. So it's federal guidance especially prohibits using stop signs as a traffic calming device. So it's not intended to slow traffic or to do traffic calming per se. It's really there's a set of criteria that need to be met in order for an intersection to become a multi-way stop as opposed to a partial stop. So even though changing things to stop is not part of traffic calming per se, some things like, and I know Teresa's already alluded to this, but bump outs is one thing. Reconfiguring the intersection, especially since some of that might need to happen as part of the sidewalk installation at the north end of the project. There's opportunities depending on how that is reconfigured for that to sort of act as traffic calming, at least in that location. So so I think there's some opportunities about how traffic can be slowed that aren't entirely dependent on just rehabbing the traffic calming devices or even just maybe moving them around. I think there's some opportunities like the bump outs and the reconfiguration of the north end are kind of those are sort of the two next tools in the toolbox for the project about how to achieve some of those traffic calming effects.
Thank you. And then we just have a couple more comments about traffic calming. One is, having lived here for 30 plus years, before and after traffic calming, it absolutely makes a huge difference. So that's a 4. And then one is I dislike the speed bumps in general because they are rough on bikes and cars. And then there's one about the speed bump on Hiscock and Brooks, and whether people feel whether it's unnecessary or not. It's a short run between those two intersections, and the noise from big trucks and trucks with trailers that are loaded with equipment make a tremendous amount of noise. And then here's a question about the process of how we would choose traffic calming, which is, wouldn't the selection of a new type of traffic calming need the same sort of community input that the originally selected methods used? So going through the whole traffic calming program. And Cyrus, I see right underneath that comment, somebody is asking you to speak up more when you talk. So if you could do that, that'd be great.
Yep, I apologize. I know that was an issue. Zoom's audio for my computer is not, the normal microphone I use doesn't typically doesn't work as well. So I have to sort of speak up into the built-in microphone. To the question about whether we'd have to go through the exact same traffic calming process, I think that's what Teresa and I need to confirm, because when my experience has been, when there's a capital project occurring, but that street has petitioned to be part of a new traffic calming project, I haven't had experience like this where we're doing some sort of construction work where traffic calming already exists. So I don't recall the exact process we would take about what changes we would undertake and what process we would consider to undergo those changes. So I think there's some, we'd have to look back at the traffic calming program to confirm that.
So this is a little bit new territory to redo a street that had gone through a traffic calming.
Yeah, I
program
mean,
and figure
I'm-
out, you know, how do we move forward with it since we have this opportunity to change things.
I'm speaking from personal experience. I think it's something that we know the answer to, that we've had experience with. It's just not, I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head about exactly what changes would require what type of re-engagement with the traffic calming program versus, you know, what I know at a minimum, if we were just to place all the traffic calming devices back to the car, that wouldn't involve really anything. But I don't know at what point we trigger sort of more engagement through the program.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, because people, you know, there are obviously feelings about the traffic calming, the speed bumps that are out there. We have a couple more comments, which I'll read. I have a speed bump in front of my house at 1116 Brooks, and it is not effective at slowing traffic because it's difficult to see and very noisy. I'd greatly prefer a bump out to the speed bump. And let's see, too many bump outs cause many issues. It turns Brooks into essentially a one-way street, and I've seen opposing cars come to a stop almost hitting each other. So that's a thought about using bump outs. The existing bump outs were part of the original traffic calming project. Let's see. Traffic calming bumps don't harm cars that go slowly. My wife and I love the traffic calming that is already in place and would love to see more traffic calming. All right, so I think that covers the traffic calming. So we do have a couple other questions. One is, how much notice will we have before our driveways are unaccessible?
About a day or two. I generally keep updated with the schedule, but schedules are very fluid, you know, given weather conditions and finding things, you know, unforeseen. So, and even supply chain issues. So that is the minimum, is 1 day notice. But as much notice as we can, we would, by giving you an idea of when you can expect it, like in what week, as a schedule is laid out to you.
The next question is, will there be bike lanes on Brooks?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I know I haven't been as involved with this project as Teresa alluded to. I'm sort of pinch-hitting. I don't know of a plan for that.
I haven't heard any introduction of that idea. So I'm inclined to say probably not. It would be a surprise to me, but you know, I could be surprised.
Will homeowners be responsible for driveway repairs if damaged by the road work or due to changes in road height, accommodations for new bump outs for sidewalks, etc.?
So any work that is done and it results in damage to your driveway or makes your driveway unusable, we would make your driveway work with the grading that we are installing. So that's part of the design or part of the construction.
The next question is how early in the morning would work start and how late will it end?
So our work hours are Monday through Saturday, 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. No holidays. And And a lot of times they don't work on Saturdays, but they are allowed to. And very rarely would they be given permission to do Sundays. And I can't see this project allowing Sunday work.
And then the next question is, will the bus route continue during the project?
That's a detail we need to work out. So yeah, that's a to be determined.
Okay, so we'll get back to that. And then Jess, you've had your hand up for a while. Please go ahead and speak if you'd like to.
Thank you. During that interval, several people have mentioned that the bump outs narrow brooks, and particularly heading south after an ice or snowstorm, those narrowings, especially when there's a bus proceeding north and you're going downhill, is really very dangerous. So though I understand and appreciate the need for traffic calming, I fear that if this gets also involved with bike lanes, we're going to have some serious narrowing of the road that could lead to accidents. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, that's it for the moment. If we wanted to move on to sidewalks.
Okay. So. New sidewalks for connectivity, our Vision Zero active transportation plan. The bus route is along Brooks, so it's helpful to have the pedestrian connectivity. It's also a school location, albeit a commuter type school. The design considerations are many. So the design team will work with the city forester to assess all the trees, including trees which are particularly sensitive, or trees that are invasive or in poor condition, which we either can remove or don't need to make any special protection. Also, we will work with the property owners. You'll be receiving an introduction letter from me with my contact information so that we can set up a site meeting and start talking about what the options are in front of your property. The other considerations, of course, are utilities, grading and drainage, crosswalk, ADA compliance, etc., and so forth. So what I've shown here is an example of a property. These are a property frontage where we will be proposing new sidewalk. So this is the city standard location, a half a foot inside the right of way. And I've pointed out on this version of it all the nuances that we're considering. So we look up here at this Norway maple, and it's an invasive species. So no special provisions and it can be removed. There's also an existing fence on the property line. Well, there's no conflict with that. As an example, this particular curb is located about 17 feet from the right-of-way line. So that's where we've located the sidewalk, which is a 5-foot city standard sidewalk. We've got the existing pavement. We've got another Norway maple, but this property has a little bit of landscaping that if we did the city standard location, we would disrupt. And we're not as concerned about little bits of landscape areas, but it certainly does depend on the level of landscaping that we'll try to work with you. We've got the distances indicated from the trunk but we are showing the critical root zone. The critical root zone is approximately the span of the tree, the overhang. And so different trees have, you know, different considerations, such as this sugar maple. If we put a sidewalk 6 feet away from a sugar maple, it'll be about 10 years, that 10 to 15 years, and forestry will need to remove it because it won't survive. I've experienced that enough to know. So we come down here and we've got a 36-inch maple. It's on private property. So I'm not sure what kind of maple it is. And I'm working with the forester to see if she will assess that and find out. I mean, it's likely one that we would want to protect, but it's not a city tree. So that is something we take into consideration. And then down here, even we have a utility pole, which is with a light pole, and that has a guy wire. So to put the sidewalk through this location, we have to relocate the guy wire. So there's a lot going on every piece of property. This is an example of, well, what if we did it a little meandering like? We're not opposed to meandering the sidewalk, but I know some property owners are opposed to it. They think it's silly when eventually the trees don't survive and then you have this meandering sidewalk. But eventually sidewalks get repaired and replaced and put in better locations as needed. So, you know, I've pointed out the disruption of the landscaping still, the sensitive sugar maple. We've gotten a little bit more room away from this maple, but the light pole can remain. The existing signpost needs to be relocated. So again, lots of things that we're looking at. This is an option in which we may introduce a bump out, because you look at how much room you give the maple tree. And when you give it more room from the disruption, not to mention that the disruption would be in a location where the pavement already is existing. So the roots have already taken into account the pavement there. So it's expected that this is not a significant disruption for this tree. But it's reduced on-street parking. It's a traffic calming mechanism. So there's a lot to be considered with that option, plus the cost, because introducing new curbs all down Brooks Street will add up. And that's not necessarily a cost that has been budgeted for. But sometimes the trade-off, so let's see, this existing light pole, we could go around it. We could go around the guy wire. Like there are opportunities to go around things. And then here is an example of putting in a permanent easement. So as I've said, we work with the property owner, and perhaps the choice is that the best place for the sidewalk is going to be, you know, a little closer to the house, a little farther away from the curb, because the tree is right next to the curb. So if we look at this sugar maple and are pulling the sidewalk almost to the edge of its root zone, we're giving it, you know, a much better chance of surviving and having longevity. Now, I've noted that these particular trees, well, this one is a little leaf linden. And this one down here is a northern red oak, and those happen to be hardier. The forester has advised, of course, stay as far away from any tree as possible, but it is difficult. So the type of tree is considered. And if the homeowner is, the property owner is willing to provide easements, then that, is better for the tree. But I know that it encumbers your property, and it's, and you may not want people walking 10 feet further onto your property. So there's the trade-off. It's tough to figure out what the best place to put it is. All right, with all that, do you have questions about the new sidewalks?
Well, we have our original question, which is to install new sidewalks, how will existing trees, mailboxes, and utility poles be removed? And you did talk about how we might work around and address those, but I'm wondering, Carol, if you don't mind adding detail, if you wanted to know the actual mechanics of how they would be removed, like timing, if that's what you were after, timing and how we physically actually take things out.
Was that the person, Carol?
No,
Yes.
that's not
Yes,
Carol.
this is.
Oh,
Okay.
sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Carol, yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah. My house is where there are no sidewalks now. I just went out and looked. There's huge, wonderful, very large tree. It's so big right across from me that it's not going to be able to accommodate a bump out or any kind of easement. What's going to happen in that case? Will it be removed?
Well, it depends on the condition. It depends on the type of tree. If it's an invasive kind of tree, my understanding is that's not the kind of tree worth saving, as large as it may be, and so that feels heartbreaking to me to some extent. But the one thing that I had mentioned is if there is pavement next to it right now, that is where a bump out can be created, because that would be sidewalk in lieu of asphalt pavement.
The only pavement is the street itself.
Right. And so the bump out, let me show you the slide of the bump out. So this is the bump out option where you've got, this is the existing, if you can see my pointer, the existing back of curb. And a bump out takes a new curb, I've made it a little darker over here, a new curb, and brings it out about 6 or 8 feet. And that, so the existing curb was right here. So this is all pavement, and now all that pavement gets replaced with sidewalk as a possibility.
Well, as I need to repeat this, the tree itself, the trunk is right next to the curb. There's no way that you can do an easement, a practical easement or a bump out that would not compromise the trunk, the roots.
Right. So on this property example, the tree trunk is right next to the curb. And so the idea is that you take the curb out, oopsies, out and around. But, certainly I can meet with you on your property and we can discuss, the details better,
Okay.
better for you to understand. Because if you look over on this side of the slide, you will see that there is pavement or curb right next to the trunk. And then when we go to this sort of scenario, you can pull that sidewalk over to a location where the pavement was. So it seems to be an even trade-off, if I can help you understand that.
Okay, and if we put into factor that the bus that keeps on coming up and down the street, mostly empty, and passing cars, it's a very narrow street. I don't know. I don't see how this is going to be possible, but I'll stay tuned.
Right, so the street is about 30 feet wide. And so we've considered 11-foot lanes and 8 feet for the parking. So the space allocation is there. And I know that will make people less comfortable. But that's an inherent traffic calming. And yes, the buses know how to drive down 10-foot lanes if that's what they're given.
Thank you.
Right, our next question has to do with the potential for having it on one side, and it reads, where we have had no sidewalks for all these years and where there is a sidewalk on the other side of the street, why do we need to have them on both sides of the street when there are so many issues with our landmark trees? So the question essentially is, would we entertain having sidewalks on one side of the street?
We haven't considered that up to this point. We had prioritized having it on both sides. We had budgeted for having it on both sides. There can be a sort of buy it in bulk cost savings as long as we're doing sidewalk on one side. We, by buying more, you get a better deal for it. So from that standpoint, it behooves us to put it in now as we've planned for it, budgeted for it. The other thing is that with the bus route on Brooks, it does seem like that would be beneficial to either, pedestrians and users of the bus on either side of the road. But, excuse me, but we will, the message has been passed along. That question is being posed. But at this point, we're going to see what we can do to get around the trees, to work with the property owners, to do what we were planning on doing and budgeted for.
Right, and this next question is about bump out. So the character of Upper Brooks is defined by many large trees, primarily oaks. Anything that changes this would be very detrimental. The width of the street would accommodate a bump out for the extent of this new sidewalk. Is that being considered? And as I understand it, yes, that is being considered. That's what you've been talking about, Teresa, but do correct me if I'm wrong. And then the second part is encroaching into private property does not seem viable given the distance that would be required. And as far as I know, we're not looking at going onto people's property. It would be all in the right of way. Is that correct, Teresa?
No, the last option I pointed out is where we would possibly go onto people's property. This example shows a 10-foot easement. You know, and there can be varying widths of that proposed easement depending on what tree we're trying to avoid, what the conditions of the yard are. You know, there's a lot to consider. So, you know, I don't see us going 20 feet into someone's property, but 5 to 10 feet, you know, sort of hovering near the right-of-way line, but doing our best to avoid, you know, these sensitive trees, because it is to some extent, you know, the concern about, you know, the bump outs that are somewhat controversial. Not everybody is loving the idea of the bump outs. It's an additional traffic calming, so we're not positive how much of that can be implemented, you know, resulting in reduced on-street parking. So there is a lot to sort of work out as we go through the design effort and vet these concepts through the transportation team and through the city engineer.
And the next question is there no way to have a few sections of sidewalk like we have on Sunset directly adjacent to the road? It sounds like yes, there is. And then nobody keeps our sidewalks clear very rapidly after a storm. Seems like a good compromise for some sidewalk gaps to save old trees in front yards. So yeah, it sounds like the answer is yes, that we could have that.
Yeah, and I wanted to point out that this option, getting over a cold. This option, had it shown against the new curb, and we could just as easily do that with an existing curb. But the other thing to note is that when you go to cross the driveway, because the driveway is a curb cut, it makes the grading difficult in that vicinity. So in the vicinity of the driveways, when we cross the driveways, we like to be at least 3 or 5 feet away from the back of curb. Because of the slopes of the driveways, it needs to be done in order to make the slopes of the sidewalk work.
All right, will homeowners have a chance to talk to the forester? That's one question, and then there's a follow-up question.
I don't know what the typical procedure or availability is that she has to do so. I would have to, I guess, ask and find out.
Okay. And then the second part of this person's question is that they have drainage issues in their yard that could impact and undermine the proposed sidewalk. I guess it's not a question, it's more of a statement, but something for us to take into consideration.
Okay. Yeah, we definitely want to look into drainage, what's currently, how properties currently drain, and, you know, if that can be mitigated.
Right. And then somebody's asking if we can just talk a little bit more about the process of talking with homeowners that would have sidewalks installed in front of their homes.
So I mentioned that I would send out letters to each of the properties in order to initiate contact. And I know in my past, I've worked on projects where there's only been maybe a dozen properties where we were crossing. So with each property, we laid out a few options and shared those with each property owner. So it seems to me I'm going to send a letter initiating contact, and we will come up with some concepts and discuss, like either meeting on site or exchanging plans, you know, whatever works best. But I'm available to meet on site to discuss how things would look out there.
Okay. And then there's a couple more questions about leaving or just having sidewalk on one side. And so right now, that's not the policy direction with our Vision Zero plan that we've adopted. So that's not the direction right now, but that is something that we would potentially consider. Is that correct, Teresa?
Yes, that's my understanding is, you know, that's not what we're planning on. But it, you know, I guess it would take many voices to dispute, you know, this project's direction.
And then there's a question about accommodating so many bump outs, like having a lot of bump outs for so many trees. Specifically, it reads, there are so many landmark trees on the east side of Brooks, north of Mixed Wood. How can you possibly accommodate bump outs for so many treed areas? Is that something we'll have to look into as we get, you know, look at property to property?
We have to ease all that out. You know, even with this example, we had a Norway maple here, we had a Norway maple there. So that's 2 Norway maples where, okay, we're not going around landmark trees here, but we really have to dig more into the design. Part of, I apologize, I neglected to mention, part of reaching out at this stage is to introduce the idea of the project, the sidewalk is coming, and for you to consider that, you know, landscaping, other landscaping in the right of way may be disrupted, and you may want to take certain action to protect, you know, any sort of landscaping that you would want to relocate yourselves.
Right, and we have a hand raised, so I'm going to go to that person and then get back to the written comments. So Tom, go ahead.
Actually, this is Susan, Tom's wife. We're both on the same screen here. And this is back to the concept of having sidewalk just or leaving it as is across from on the 1100 block and not adding a new sidewalk where there already is sidewalk on the other side. I just wanted to point out that on another of the new projects, meaning the last block of Hiscock before Summit, the new project is just putting in sidewalk on one side of the street, even though there are no sidewalks on either side. So there, you know, there certainly has been other thoughts in other places about being able to say that sidewalk on one side is sufficient. And the other part of my question is, who will need to make the decision about potentially eliminating any proposed sidewalk on the east side of Brooks in the 1100 block with the landmark trees?
I'm inclined to say that it starts with the engineering department. We would look at it ultimately, perhaps the city engineer with the advisement of the transportation engineering group. But I would say, generally speaking, it's the engineering department.
Thank you.
All right, back to the written comments. We have a budget question. The budget question is, we've talked about things that potentially will add cost to the project. A couple of city road projects recently have been delayed because of budget issues, quotes climbing in higher than expected, road utilities needing more work than initially planned, driving up the cost, etc. How are those sorts of contingencies, plus the potential additions we've talked about tonight, being handled for this project? Or to rephrase, what are the odds that this project will be delayed due to money?
I don't have a real good sense of that. I know when we put the budget together initially. You know, that is a pretty sizable group of engineers and planners that are looking at costs, and they are projecting it, you know, into the future with an increase expected. But things have been out of control lately. So, you know, it is something that we will look at in the preliminary phase. We'll put together preliminary plans and come up with an estimate at that time, and figure out, you know, where to go from there, whether we you know, adjust the scope of the project or delay it. There are, you know, considerations. So it's something that we haven't taken a better look at just yet.
Teresa, if I may, I believe are there any non-local funds associated with this project?
No.
Okay.
Wait, I take that back. For the sidewalk, we were planning on using county millage money.
This isn't, I mean, everything Teresa said is absolutely right, and this doesn't negate that at all. I'll just point out that there are additional complications when, in terms of scheduling and funding, when there's multiple funding sources, especially at, you know, above the county level, I'd say is kind of where it starts to get maybe a little more complicated. But yeah, it's been a challenge to try to account for all that. But I think some of the recent projects, and you know, maybe the one you're referring to is Scioto Church, got recent coverage for that, and so it's a little bit of a different funding situation, which I think adds to the complexity. That while this project has its own complexities, it doesn't have that particular one. So.
All right, there's a couple questions about crosswalks. Will there be a crosswalk from the new proposed biting sidewalk to Brooks sidewalk on the west side of Brooks? Additionally, will there be a crosswalk across Sunset from the east side of Brooks sidewalk to the Sunset Brooks Park entrance? Both are highly desired.
I know we were, I want to say, looking at a crosswalk at Mixedwood. I'm sure we will look at all the intersections to see where they are warranted, but I'm not positive as to what that determination is at this point. Cyrus, do you have any other insight on that?
No, I mean, my understanding is we haven't, I think a lot of the design concepts that have been talked about so far have been focusing on, you know, sidewalk alignment with, you know, and potentially minimizing impact to trees and private property. I don't know how much has been put into where crosswalks would go. I think that could be, I think feedback like this is helpful to help us decide, you know, that there is interest and desire for those crosswalks. So.
And then the second part of that question, up at Sunset, we'll look at some concepts after we get past the sidewalks, to look at the possibilities of the reconfiguration of that intersection, and I will bring up the crosswalk consideration there.
Yeah, and the similar next question, will this project add crosswalks where they're missing, e.g. no crosswalk at Brooks and Mixedwood? So it sounds like we'll look into that, knowing that there's a desire for crosswalks.
Right.
And here's a question about ADA, that there's some challenging grading on this person's property. How will grading for ADA be managed, and how will homeowners be consulted?
Well, we will approach it similarly to properties that don't have ADA problems. We'll communicate about what options are available given the constraints. Now, with that, I understand, I can picture some of the profiles that I've been shown, you know, conceptually, that, oh, yep, there are some very steep grades, but there is an allowance of having steep grades when the road is very steep. So I've not been to San Francisco, but I imagine that it must be tough designing ADA compliance in San Francisco. But if an exception to you know, maximum 5%, or have to have a handrail in the locations that exceed that, you know, the exception is that you can follow the grade of the road. So, you know, we will try to limit the distance in which we have excessive slopes, and create some sort of landing pads as some intermediate places for recovery. But, you know, there is allowance for the steeper slopes, and that's just the running slope. As far as cross slopes are concerned, in some cases we'll put in small or large, depending on the situation, little retaining walls, either a little curb, or if it's a little taller, it's more of a retaining wall. So that can be a possibility. Another possibility, if there is such a grade difference on the cross slope, is to grade a little farther into your property, which then makes us request a temporary grading permit. So not a permanent sidewalk easement, but just something to make the grading necessary for us to put in the appropriate sidewalk level and have it work with your yard. So generally, property owners have been amenable to providing temporary grading permits, just so that the sidewalk works best with their property, because often they don't want a curb or a little retaining wall.
Okay, this next question is, will sidewalks in our area positively or negatively affect home values in our area? And I can tell you from a planning perspective, all the contemporary research on putting in walkability would improve home values, but maybe Teresa and Cyrus, you have more information to add to that.
I don't. I appreciated that you had some.
Sure. Yes. Yeah. Typically it does a property good. And then this next comment is another call to just have a sidewalk on one side of the street. And then commented that bump outs on the east side of the street, there will be limited parking on the side, seeing that there is no parking on the west side. So that's something we need to take into consideration. How many properties without sidewalks are part of the project? Do you know that offhand, Teresa or Cyrus?
I don't know. 12, there's lots. If I had to guess, I would say 30.
Okay, so quite a few then. And then we have another question about crosswalks. This one for across Sunset that leads to the Sunset Brooks nature area. Would we consider that? So we'll be looking into crosswalks, it sounds like. And so that would be one to consider. And then here's another comment. Many of us will insist that we have sidewalks on the east side of Brooks, north of Biting, unless there is a stop sign and crosswalk at Biting across Brooks. There are 15 plus kids on the North Minor and Biting that currently cannot safely walk to Wines Forsyth. Oh, here's another request, Cyrus, to speak up again. So remember to speak up if you answer another question. We have a question, are the preliminary sidewalk design and alternative sketches that have been presented available for the entire Brook Street?
Yeah, I don't see why not. This is available to the public. These slides.
I'm interpreting this as being, or do we have designs like this for all the properties that would have sidewalks? And I'm understanding that no, not yet, that we haven't
Right.
actually, and these are just examples. These aren't even anything set in stone,
Right.
but they would be available
Mm-hmm.
once they start getting developed.
Mm-hmm.
And these slides we'll put these on the webpage. So these slides will be available to everyone. What is the homeowner's liability for accidents on the new sidewalks? Will we be required to maintain the walks in the winter? Will we have to contract with a service or shovel ourselves in the winter? Will these sidewalks cost us money or labor going forward?
Well, there is a city ordinance that requires the maintenance of sidewalk across your frontage. What liability there is, I'm not sure. Outside of that, I mean, if as a maintenance issue, if your sidewalk isn't cleared of ice and snow, I imagine, although I'm not an attorney, I imagine there would have to be some liability in that, but I really don't know. Otherwise, you know, someone having an accident on the sidewalk, I can't imagine that there would be liability from that standpoint if it's not maintenance, a result of poor maintenance. Now, another maintenance thought is when trees will uproot sidewalk flags, and there can be trip hazards, but we have a program in which, you know, a portion of the city is done each year where those flags are either cut, sawed off, or they are replaced in order to correct that trip hazard.
And this next one is a comment. Because of the beautiful canopy of the trees that offer so much of our neighborhood, we'd like us to know that we are not just concerned for our own properties, but for all the trees. We are collectively concerned about all of the trees and what new sidewalks would do to them. And then here's a note of appreciation about the good answer about ADA grading. Would you consider a bump out in order to avoid retaining walls inside the right of way?
I suppose it depends. It depends on how much we're allowed to consider bump outs. For one, we have to establish that. But, you know, otherwise, if that's an available tool, then it would be considered.
And the next question is, when will the balance of the alternative design sketches be available for these properties?
That's a good question. I know we are currently laying them out. And so it may take, let's see, it may take until November to hear from me. So, you know, or not to hear from me necessarily, because I can get the introduction letters out, but to see concepts, you know, as I initiate contact and, you know, as you contact me, we can definitely, you know, start digging in and laying those out. We're currently looking at them, but we're looking at them without any feedback. So right now, we're taking shots in the dark as to what would be the best plan of action, what are our options, but we do need your input. So, you know, hopefully it would be within the next couple months, because as mentioned earlier, we want to get it out to bid to the contractors early in the year to get the best pricing.
Kind of in a related question, there was, this was asked earlier, and it was somebody wondering if you had been out to the site yet, Teresa. And my understanding is that you will be, as you get in contact with property owners, you'll be going out and visiting each site where you're requested to come out and take a look. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Right. And then a couple comments. One is very few cars park on the street on the east side of Brooks where the sidewalk gap exists. They generally have longer driveways that can accommodate cars. And the next comment is, so a bump out would probably have less impact on parking and be a good alternative to save the trees. And then somebody asked if they could opt out of a sidewalk on their property.
That is not an option. You know, the point is, of course, to provide the connectivity. We're trying to eliminate those gaps. So the fortunate thing at this point, based on a millage that was passed in 2020, about 2 years ago, the property owners are no longer assessed for that improvement. So the city as a whole, or the city voters anyway, decided that it was important to fund the infill of these gaps.
And this next question is, can we request a meeting with Teresa now, or do we need to wait for the letter? And I think, Teresa, you have a slide with your email on this?
Yep, at the very end, I have a slide with my email address, or it's even on a2gov.org/Brooks. So you can reach out to me immediately. You don't have to wait for me.
All right, and there is a hand that's up. I think it might be left over from before. I think it's Sue Blessing's hand, but I will ask to unmute you if you would like to talk.
If you'd like to talk. I've done it.
Oh, hi.
Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I just saw your hand up.
Oh, I didn't have my hand up, but
I think it was from before, so.
oh, okay. I already asked my questions. I look forward to speaking with Teresa further about
Very good.
the landmark trees.
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right.
All right.
That's it for the moment.
Okay. Intersection reconfiguration. So this is a fun intersection. With Vesper intersecting with Sunset, and Brooks intersecting with Sunset, and Brooks and Vesper intersecting. There's a lot going on there. So, you know, we'd like to reduce pavement. I mentioned that earlier. You know, that's definitely better for the environment. But we also believe that clarification to the drivers will be better. You know, I've had a little bit of feedback about how it's confusing. I mean, I have been out there and seen the confusion. It's something you have to get used to, I suppose, but we're looking at having a single intersection with Sunset. I think that's the most efficient way to approach it. And so primarily we have two concepts in general. So one where we have Brooks intersecting Sunset and Vesper sort of teeing into Brooks. And then the other one is where we have Vesper intersecting Sunset and Brooks teeing into Vesper. So the benefit I will point out on this one is more of an alignment with the park property, and that would help us with the crosswalk location. But I am looking to hear feedback from the residents, from the people who use this all the time. You know, what sort of things we might want to be considering, or you know, thoughts in general about it.
All right, we have one hand raised. Tom, go ahead.
Well, the second option looks like it might be pretty rough for the bus. The bus will be turning left onto Sunset. It's just one thought. I look at it, I go, how's the bus supposed to negotiate that? But
Okay, I appreciate that.
And then we've got one written comment that says concept 1 looks better. Northbound left hand turns will be difficult with concept 2. And then Ricardo, please go ahead. So you should be able to go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't unmute. Yeah,
Oh, no
I agree
problem.
with people who say the concept 1 seems to be best, especially when you think about the bus. That's, yeah, so I think concept 1 makes better sense.
There's concept 2.
Mhm.
Okay.
Concept 2 is there. And I will offer that another concept, I don't have it up today, presented today, but we considered a concept that was similar to this alignment, where you've got a street intersecting Sunset perpendicularly. Now in this concept, it happens to be Brooks, but we could just as easily take Vesper and intersect Sunset perpendicularly, but leaving Brooks, you know, teeing into Vesper. So I'm you know, hearing the feedback on the acute angle, which is understandable, but you know, that can be remedied by having this turn more perpendicular to Sunset. So so even the question of whether Brooks tees into Vesper or Vesper tees into Brooks is being considered.
We have a question of who will own and maintain the extra property created on the 2 corner houses.
My understanding is that would be, well, it would be right of way. It would be right of way frontage. Now, if a rain garden was planted, I would understand that the city maintains rain gardens. That's, I guess, what I thought our policy was. if it was just lawn and sidewalk, like any other, you know, normal or unlandscaped frontage, you know, it would be frontage to those properties.
And speaking of rain gardens, somebody is wondering, will you do 2 rain gardens with concept 1?
You know, we need to, I guess, look at how it comes together, look at the design.
Okay, and then comments that Brooks is busier than Vesper, so concept 1 makes more sense. Concept 1 might be best. Here's a question. Is there a reason that a conceptual number 3 with Brooks going straight into Sunset isn't there?
You know, that was also put together as a drawing, just like this one was. And so we had a discussion about the acute angle. If we are willing to have an acute angle, we could also study the option where Brooks went straight through and had an acute angle, you know, in the other direction. So the only other consideration that I had for that is, you know, I understand it's an existing condition, but you know, it was the thought that headlights teeing into you know, a front yard is less than desirable. So, you know, if that could be mitigated, it, you know, is probably a positive thing.
All right, and then a couple more comments. There's a lot more Brooks than Vesper traffic, so suggested plan around Brooks traffic more. Brooks as a major north-south route for the water treatment plan seems best as the T intersection. There's a lot more traffic on Brooks and Vesper, so making Brooks the through state would seem to reduce energy consumption and pollution by causing less stopping and starting. Let's see, Brooks is definitely more of a thoroughfare, so concept 1. And then a comment, I'm pretty sure studies have shown that accidents are increased by acute angles at intersections. And then also a comment that rain gardens need a water source, usually coming from a rooftop. It would also, you know, in this case, it would be the runoff from the street that the rain gardens would be capturing.
Right.
I think that's it. Let me see. We've gotten through the written questions. There's a hand up. Again, this might be left over. It was Tom. Did you have anything more to say, Tom?
No, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I'll try to keep my eye out for hands raised. Ricardo, you also have your hand raised. Is that from before?
Yes, that's from before. I'm learning.
Okay. Yeah,
Okay.
no, sorry. I'll keep an eye out for that. And then here's a written question. Will you consider a pavement reduction at mixed wood red oak similar to Sunset Brooks?
I don't know that is being considered. I haven't looked at the area, honestly, to see if that's a possibility. I know we were focusing more of our attention as far as the pavement improvements to be on Brooks. So, so that will have to be something looked at.
And we have a question about, has there been any accidents at the Sunset Brooks Vesper intersection? Do we have that, that data handy? What are we fixing?
So
No.
hopefully everyone can hear me. I'm trying to speak up.
Pavement. That's what
We
Oh,
we haven't looked in detail, or at least I haven't. Again, I'm not sort of I haven't been involved with the project terribly long. I do know there haven't been any significant injury or fatality crashes at this location. I don't know I think the short answer is yes, there have been crashes. I don't know the severity or the crash patterns. We'll be looking at that as we, I think as part of helping determine if one concept is maybe preferable over the other for that reason. But I think the truth is that in general, simplifying the intersection in any way, both concepts accomplish that. And there are other trade-offs associated with each concept, but because each concept simplifies the intersection and who might proceed at any given time and simplifies the number of directions that a driver or other street user would have to look for where traffic might come from. From that standpoint, both concepts would be an improvement in safety over what currently exists. So, yeah.
All right, I'm not seeing any more questions at the moment.
Okay. Otherwise, I have the final slide offering an opportunity for input by either contacting me or going onto our website and looking for more information. You can also subscribe to that page for updates to that page, which do not happen terribly often. So it's not necessarily like you would be getting a weekly email if that would be something you fear. But it is offered to keep informed. And thank you everyone for your feedback and coming tonight to learn about the project.
And we have a thank you from somebody. Thank you for the thank you. We appreciate that. We have a question, who the city forester is.
Tiffany
I'm not sure I'm going to get her last name right if you know how to pronounce it.
Jacobazzi. It's GIA and a lot of letters. Jacobazzi is how I understand how to say it.
But we can get you in contact.
Yes.
And then other thank you. Yeah, thank you. And thank you for joining us. We do appreciate you spending the time. I know it's not always the top thing that you want to do in an evening is sit through a meeting, a Zoom meeting in particular, but we really do appreciate you coming out and providing your input on this. There's a comment that we are very happy to get our sad street resurfaced. Thank you.
Understandably.
All right, we'll hang out for a few more minutes just to see if any straggler questions come in.
All right.
Otherwise, again, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
In case of emergency, lozenges came in handy today.
Oh.